Hello, fellow law nerds, and welcome to a very special episode of Boom Lawyered, a Rewire News Group podcast hosted by the legal journalism team that is so excited to have this guest with us today. I am Jess Pieklo, Rewire News Group's executive editor. Rewire News Group is the one and only home for expert repro journalism that inspires you to mark the Dobbs anniversary with, I don't know, a grimace or something, because it's not great. And the Boom Lawyered podcast is part of that mission. So big thanks to our subscribers and welcome to our new listeners and viewers. So I am so excited to introduce my guest and co-host today, journalist and author Jessica Valenti, who has an absolute powerhouse in this moment in keeping track of our abortion access landscape after Dobbs. If you do not already subscribe to her newsletter, Abortion Every Day, you must do so. It is critical reading in this time. So this episode is part of a larger editorial package we've put together over at Rewire News Group to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision and the access of legal abortion as many of us knew it. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you for joining. I wish the circumstances were cheerier, but I'm thrilled to have you anyway.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah, wish it was different, but we're in it together.
We are. We truly are. And, Amani's not here with us today because she is currently in Paris living her best life.
Oh,
I know, right?
That's nice.
Going to see Beyonce in Paris is only Amani can do. But before she left, I know, right? Truly earned it. She made a joke that this was going to be the Italian matriarchs of abortion access episode. And I kind of love that. Right?
Love it.
But I mean, fuck, what a year, right? Truly, what a year. And, I kind of queued this up when we were getting ready for the show by saying I wanted to talk a little bit about the Alito League because the Dobbs decision was bad for all of the obvious reasons that it was bad. But we also had the Alito League a couple months before, and nothing in between then really seemed to change. And looking back on that now, I was angry then, but I'm really angry about that fact now. And I'm just curious, how about you? How is that hitting?
I mean, I'm angry all the time. I have a hard time distinguishing what those levels of anger are at any given point, to be honest. I'm in this place where I think I was numb at that point. Numb and so sad. And then when the decision came down, that's when it really just switched over for me to anger and let's get some shit done. Okay. And I think a lot of people who work in this space, it was that was the moment where you're all right, gotta dig in. I mean, all of us were always digging in, obviously, but yeah, something just switched for me at that moment where I sort of put that sadness aside and put that numbness aside and was okay, let's go. Time to do it.
Got to get to work. I mean, because you're right. You have been writing about attacks on bodily autonomy, on our rights, on all of these things for well over a decade now. And we're definitely part of the chorus of people that were saying, we saw this coming. This wasn't a surprise, but it really was incumbent in that moment to be all right, whatever is the past is the past. We have work to do right now. And part of that work for you has been launching this, wildly important and critical newsletter in this time right now, where you are doing the work of keeping track of all of the attacks at the state level since Justice Alito and the conservatives said that this is now even more of a political issue. How is that going? Just generally, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm really tired. It's awful. Anyone who does this work, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to do it day in and day out. But it makes me feel like I am accomplishing something, and it makes me feel like some semblance of control. And I think that's part of the reason that people like the newsletter there is so much going on. We are being attacked from all angles at every level. And for me, I was like, I can't feel overwhelmed. I can't feel inundated, because that's the point. They want us to feel like frozen
Yep.
into inaction because of that overwhelm. And so at first, doing the newsletter was just a way for me to feel like I know the landscape. I know what's going on. They're not getting anything by me. I know exactly what's happening every day. And so I think that that is why it's been useful. And like, honestly, it feels like, if I'm going to be obsessive about this, let's like share that obsession with everyone else. Like, let's put that mental health disorder to good use.
Totally. Yes.
But there is so much. Like, honestly, like, I was joking with someone the other day, like, it could be abortion every hour. Like, it really, there is something new that is happening, like, every single day, multiple times a day. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, the speed at which this is happening and how quickly it's all snowballing.
And in some ways, everything old is new again in the states as a result of the Dobbs decision. I mean, Amani and I did an episode recently on the North Carolina bill that was recently passed. And I know this was something that you covered in your newsletter pretty extensively too. And we talked about the fact that that was this really anti-democratic push. And they tacked on all of this unnecessary bullshit to it. And Amani reminded us of the motorcycle helmet bill that North Carolina did, like way back in 2010, 2011, 2012, like early years of all of that model legislation where, you know, conservative lawmakers were just starting to like stitch together various parts of abortion restrictions and under the cover of darkness or like without any debate. And we're really starting to see that again. But as somebody who over the course of the last year has literally been tracking the movements on the states and is also accustomed to some really bonkers stuff coming out of conservative lawmakers, I have to ask you, what has surprised you the most in terms of the legislation that we've seen, both good and bad? Because there's been some, you know, I mean, some states are doing some good stuff too.
That's a great question. I am pretty hard to shock these days, I think. But one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, I'm actually in the middle of writing a column about this, is the way that they're sort of giving up the game in a lot of these bills where they're admitting really like what the consequences of this will be, like in so many of the medical emergency exceptions, right? They have that language and it's almost identical across these bills about mental health is not considered a medical emergency, down to them specifying even if a doctor diagnoses you as suicidal as a result of being forced to carry a pregnancy, that's not a medical emergency. And I'm just like, they're saying it out loud. They are anticipating that people are going to become suicidal as a result of these bills, and they're preempting that. And it's really stuff like that. It's the cruelty that's written into these bills that I find shocking, maybe not surprising, but shocking. And the way that a lot of the mainstream media responds to that and sort of buys into their framing. I think that's been like the other really frustrating piece of this for me. I sort of thought that we would be better at this at this point. You know, with mainstream media outlets like calling the North Carolina bill, calling like 12 and 15 week bans compromise bills, acting as if Republicans are conceding something, as if they're giving something up, like, oh wow, they really wanted a total abortion ban, but they're putting in exceptions that no one can use, as if that is some sort of concession on their part. That has been really shocking in a difficult way. Like I sort of maybe naively thought that we would be better at that.
And I gotta say, I mean, I agree with all of that. It's consistently buying into these false framings that the anti-choice movement puts out there very uncritically. You know, the media has sort of learned its lesson with election denialism and calls that out very clearly. And it just has not done so to the same extent with the kind of, well, I mean, where let's talk about the messaging some more, because this is something that you in your newsletter really do a great job of. It's not just tracking the legislation, it's really sort of tracking the bullshit, right? That is coming from these conservative spaces. And we are functionally already in an election cycle, right? Here we are. We're in an election cycle. It's going to be the first election cycle since Roe versus Wade was overturned. We know abortion is at the center of it. We know that the messaging is already starting, and it's just kind of a hot gaslighting mess, right? Like, this is what they do, right?
Yeah, I may have to steal that and call a new section a bullshit tracker. I feel like that's the most accurate description of what I'm trying to do, because there is so much bullshit, right? It's the compromise, reasonable, common, like if I see the words reasonable, common sense, middle of the road one more time, I'm really going to lose my shit.
Yeah.
And watching Nancy Mace from South Carolina go out in the media and talk about, oh, we really need to like hear each other out. We really need to be more in the middle. Like, everyone can agree on birth control. Like, that's not the middle. Agreeing on birth control access is not the middle. Like, I can't believe that we're in this place where they are trying to redefine what the center is to such an amazing degree. But of course, like, they have to. Abortion bans are so unpopular. Voters want nothing to do with this. They hate them. And so it really is in their interest to try to make it seem as if they're giving something up, as if they're listening to voters. When of course, like the opposite is true. They're doing everything that they can to, take voters' choice and voice away from them. The other thing I wrote about in terms of messaging this week, last week, everything is blending into one.
Time's a flat circle. It's fine.
It's like, who knows? What day is it? The federal ban stuff. They're all talking about a federal ban. They won't use the word ban anymore. Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, who else? Nikki Haley, like Kellyanne Conway, who now is advising they're all calling it a national consensus, a national compromise, a national agreement.
I can't believe I can believe it, but I can't believe it.
I know, like, they won't use the word ban because they know. And this is where, like, the media piece gets really frustrating to me. They want to make it seem as if Americans are evenly split on this issue, as if we're like totally polarized and like both sides need to give something up. That's not the case at all. Americans overwhelmingly support abortion rights, right? Like, why are we, I don't know. And that's when I get really frustrated about like accepting the framing and being so, Democrats being so defensive. It's,
Well, so I have a couple questions and thoughts and follow up to that. It is so frustrating, particularly to your point of abortion being so popular, because, aside from like just screaming into the void on Twitter, one of the things I'm trying to do is consistently point to the electoral results in these spaces. I'm like, will you look at the state of Michigan, for example, that came back from a Tea Party hellscape in so many ways, and how so? By largely and unapologetically running on a restoration of rights in a way that we haven't seen in a lot of state houses. What's going on in Ohio? Republicans are actually trying to change the process so people can't vote on abortion in Ohio because they know that they will lose. And yet the media is still here. Like, I'm imagining the sort of top lines on whatever piece of national legislation would get introduced, and it being called the national consensus on abortion at 6 weeks, rather than in the legislative title actually using the word ban. Like, I think that's true. So as members of the media, aside from just screaming at people on Twitter, how can we get our people to do better, to start to understand that, they're suckers if they take these talking points the way they are, the same way that they are suckers if they take the police union talking points as the way they are whenever there's a moment of police violence?
It's so hard because such a big part of it, like, is this big overarching problem of like both sides journalism, right?
Yeah.
Where they feel like the only way to be objective is to give equal column inches to both sides, no matter how false, wrong, untrue the other side is. And it's more important than ever, not just because of how popular abortion rights are, But like one of the anti-choice movement's biggest strategies right now is using all of this fake science and this fake
Yes.
data. And we've seen in the mifepristone lawsuit, that needs to be called out every single time. That can't be included as a real thing, you
Right.
know? And it's so frustrating. And so I think that we can call them to account, but it's also a matter of like staffing. Like, do you have people writing about this issue who
Mm-hmm.
know what they're doing, who have been on this issue for a long time? Do you have people writing and editing these stories who have some sort of history with reproductive
Yeah.
rights? And this, like, if you don't have a history with this, if you don't have a certain level of expertise in the issue, there are so many things that you can miss,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a lot of stuff that they're missing that they shouldn't miss, that even if you don't have a history
Yeah.
with reproductive rights, you should get. Like, one of the things I've been complaining about constantly at the newsletter is Students for Life being constantly quoted uncritically. The Atlantic did this big
Yeah.
flashy like profile of them, didn't mention once that they want to make birth control illegal, didn't ask them a single question about this.
Yeah.
um, and it's stuff like that where I'm like, you don't need to be an abortion rights expert to know that this is something you should be asking.
Right. And it is such a disservice because, as you all know from existing in this space for so long, one of the things that the anti-choice and anti-abortion movement has done so well is really field test and market its terminology. So folks who are not
Mm-hmm.
in it in the day-to-day hear
Yes.
something like Students for Life seems like a reasonable group, the same way the Federalist Society seems very reasonable,
Right.
without understanding that there's actually a very autocratic agenda going on
Yeah.
behind there. And I mean, we talk about Students for Life and how extreme their positions are, but their positions are extreme to the rest of folks. They're not extreme within
Yeah.
the anti-choice movement at all, and they are such an important
Yes.
messaging arm. And I think folks don't understand that part too, I mean,
Yeah.
um one of the things that I have been both sort of like wildly disappointed and also kind of not surprised is the
Mm.
fact that all of these stories that we are seeing of medical crises that we know are
Mm.
existing, daily, if not hourly in some states, that we're seeing kind of just a collective shrug, right? Like folks
Yeah.
are reporting that, and not by, in our spaces, but really like, oh, here's another really
Yeah.
scary thing that happened because abortion bans are bad. And I want to say, and so then what are we doing about it? Like, we're in a human rights
Yeah.
crisis. Like, that's the part
Yeah.
where I feel like the media is also losing a little bit of the narrative, is asking that follow-up in terms of, okay, well, if we are requiring people to, develop
Yeah.
sepsis in a parking lot, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, it's so true. So, and that has always been the fear for me, right? Is that as these stories come out, because there's so many of them, and because we're only going to see more of them, that it's just going to become normalized. That it's going
Right.
to, that it's like, oh, that's really sad. That's so upsetting.
Yeah.
Next, right?
Yeah.
Which is a horrific idea. Like, we live in an era of modern medicine, and yet we're treating it as if this is like completely normal to let someone develop sepsis in a parking lot, to let someone develop sepsis at all, right? Like, it's so insane to me. It's so bizarre to me. Um, and I mean, listen, this is part of the reason I'm doing the newsletter is in the hopes that we can talk about this in a way that humanizes these stories. And of
Right.
course, a lot of these articles that are coming out are so great and so wonderful in terms of the journalism that's being done. But we have to figure out a way to keep humanizing these stories. And then the other piece of it is, and this is another thing I'm writing about, is the most extreme stories are so important, and obviously the stuff is happening and the suffering is happening. Um, but anyone who is forced into pregnancy, that is a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
Like, all of this is a tragedy. And my concern is that if we are overly focused on the most extreme, the most tragic, the most newsworthy stories,
Mhm.
that it becomes easier for Republicans to say, "Oh yeah, you know what? That is really sad. Like here's an exception. Here's another exception for you." And so now everything's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're sort of setting ourselves up a little bit to give them that opportunity. When the truth is, no one should be forced to be pregnant, whether they get sick or they don't get sick,
Yeah.
right? So that's the other piece that I've been thinking about a lot.
That's a real callback to being sort of grateful for the scraps of abortion
Mm,
access in the Roe era, right? And I think,
yeah.
quite fairly a result of the safe, legal, and rare rhetoric, that we had seen before all of that. So,
Hmm.
well, that's all very grim. Amani and I like to try and keep some of it kind
It
of.
is.
It is. I mean, look, it's the reality, and we can't avoid it. But we do try to, not keep it light for the sake of just like, hey, it's all yucks in abortion landscape. But really because part of I think the strategy is to have folks be
Yeah.
discouraged, have folks feel disempowered, particularly in areas that already maybe feel sort of complex, or they have their own sorts of, just like their own relationship with, because everybody has a
Mhm.
relationship to abortion, whether they realize it or not is another thing. So let's talk about some of the things that are helping you get through. How are you finding joy right now, Jessica? Because this is an
How am I
important part of
finding joy?
resistance.
I have a backyard, which in Brooklyn is very rare. um,
Congratulations. That's
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you. That is like the one place I'm finding a lot of joy. I'm trying to like work outside as much as I can,
Yeah.
like do a little, I'm terrible at gardening, but I'm trying, I'm doing it. I have a great raspberry bush that has
Oh,
like
yeah.
grown tremendously. May have some squirrel poop on it, but that's okay. We'll wash them.
Fine.
um, Trying to do a lot of outside stuff. But honestly, the reproductive rights and justice community, I think, has been so helpful. And having people to talk about this with and having people to like bounce ideas off of
Yeah.
and being able to have conversations with people who know who know what's going on, I think is also really helpful. And I'm so grateful for that. And I wish more people had that. Like that's one of the things, and I'm sure you get this too with your audience. Like I hear a lot from people at the newsletter who like don't necessarily have that community elsewhere
Yep.
but online, right? Um, and that's so they come to podcasts like yours and newsletters like mine to
Mm,
find that commiseration because it's so important, because you're really made to feel like you're crazy. It's
exactly.
so gaslighty. And so just the ability to have conversations with people where it's like, okay, yes, this is exactly as bad as it feels, and we can acknowledge that and talk about that. That's been great.
I have one final question for you, but
Yeah.
before I ask it, anything that you want the Boom Lawyered audience, listeners, viewers to hear and know about that we haven't had a chance yet to cover? There's so much
Oh my
going
gosh,
on.
there's so much stuff. I'm trying to think. No, I mean, you mentioned it, Ohio. I think the attacks on democracy is
Yeah.
something that we need to be talking about a lot. And again, it relates to something we were talking about with like the idea that Americans are evenly split on abortion. And of course, they're not. And the way that those attacks on democracy are so clued into that, and so much about um, an extreme minority imposing their will on the majority of voters. And I know your audience knows that, but I feel like we can't mention that enough. And
Yeah.
even when you're talking to people in your life or family members or friends who aren't necessarily pro-choice, I think most people can agree that we don't really want voters to be able to make their voices heard. So for me, like that is just a great thing to drive home, which with as many people as possible.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're always talking about how the attacks on our bodies and the attacks on our ballots are intricately connected,
Yeah.
and that's just really, I mean, that is sort of the theme here at Rewire News Group. Okay, I would be remiss if I did not ask, what was the last great meal that you've had recently?
Oh man. What was the last
I'm an
great meal?
Italian. I'm
Oh,
gonna ask you about your food.
wow. Actually, was it last night? Again, days blending into each other. I got my husband, this was more a gift for me than for him. I got him one of those pizza ovens. You know what I
Oh,
mean? Like
we
the
haven't got.
uni pizza.
Yes, yes. I'm lobbying for one of these. Are they worth it?
It's
They
so
have to be.
good. It's so
Yeah.
good. And
Okay.
so Andrew the other night made like a bunch of pizzas. And he's Polish, but he's come around and he's managed
Kelly's
to like,
Polish. We're Italian
oh, there
spirits
you
Polish
go.
men. This is amazing.
Perfect. He's like managed to like really, he knows his pizza dough now. He like can
That's
really
great.
make yeah, so it was fantastic.
Oh, I love that. Good job, Andrew. That's not easy. Jessica, thank you so much for
Of
joining
course.
us. Where can folks find you if for some reason they've been living under a rock and don't already know about your newsletter and amazing work?
Yeah, abortioneveryday.com. That's the place to go to sign up. And I'm on Twitter less and less these days. Honestly, it's a little bit too much of a shit show for me. But I'm also on Instagram, and to my great embarrassment, I'm also on TikTok at Auntie Killjoy.
I keep threatening to make a TikTok appearance.
It's
One of these
it's fun.
days.
It's
One of
fun.
these days, it's going to happen.
Do
Thank
it.
you so much for having us. And that is going to close the episode, folks. I managed to get through it without Amani. Please let her know that, although she was greatly missed. This has been the Boom Lawyer Podcast. You can find us wherever you find your podcast. That is on Apple, that is on Stitcher, that is on Spotify, basically, literally anywhere that you find us. You can follow us on our social platforms. That is Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. You can follow Amani personally at Angry Black Lady. You can follow me at Hegemommy, Hegemommy. And I will send myself out and say that we will see you on the tubes, folks.